Yo, what's going on everybody, this is Rockin here and welcome back to a brand new video. Today I'm bringing you an extremely highly requested video and that is how to make 3D Valorant thumbnails in Blender and Photoshop. So before we get started, I'd like to say I've made several other tutorials revolving around Valorant editing, making montages, things like that, so make sure you check them out if you're interested. And yeah, let's get right into it. So I'm going to be showing you using Blender 2.8. I know in one of my previous tutorials I used 2.7, but that's just because a script that we were using didn't work in the newer version. But you're going to need, you don't need 2.8, but I'm going to be showing you in 2.8. The UI is slightly different, so if you're following along, make sure you've got Blender 2.8. And the model pack we're going to be using is one by another YouTuber called Fian, so make sure you go show him some love for making this model pack. I'm currently in the process of making my own one, where I'm going to be just, simplifying the bone structures of some of the characters and making it easier for people to use, as well as some of my own custom lightrooms and things like that, but that's not ready yet. So for the time being, I'm going to be using his one, so yeah, make sure you go subscribe and like his video. He does have a pack which you can buy, which will give you some lightrooms and screenshots and things like that. However, I'm just going to be showing you using the completely free one, so if you come over to that link at the bottom of his description and download this is the one that we're going to be using. And then once you've downloaded it, just open it up and extract it into your downloads folder or whatever you want to put it, and then we'll hop straight into Blender. So to get rid of this dialog box, just click off the screen somewhere, then double tap W and select all of this, press delete to get rid of it. Now what you're going to want to do is come up to File, Append, find the free Valorant pack which you just downloaded and extracted, go into it, you'll see 3D models, then go into characters, characters.blend, collection, and then you'll be able to choose the characters that you like. Some of them will have the names that they have in game, some of them will have the names that they have in the game files. So for example, Thorn is actually Sage, but then some of the other ones like Cypher's called Cypher and not Gumshoe. So it's a bit of a mismatch, but you can just open them up and figure out which ones you want. So for me, I'm going to be using Thorn, which is Sage. That's what I used in my previous thumbnail, which I got loads of requests for. So I'm just going to basically show you how I made that exact thumbnail. So I'm going to hit append on that, and you'll see in a second. As you can see, Sage is now on my viewport. So in order to navigate around the interface, you're going to hold the middle mouse button and move the mouse around, and that's going to allow you to rotate. If you hold shift and the middle mouse button, you'll be able to go left and right and up and down. If you hold control and the middle mouse button, you'll be able to zoom in and out. They're just some basics so that you'll be able to move your characters around. Now to center her, you're just going to want to press G and then Y and then type 1.5, and that'll put her in the middle. Some of them will have different values, so basically just come up to here where the scale mesh is, come down to this little orange box here, and you can see the location. So this was at minus 1.5, like that. You're just going to drag it to 0. Some of them will be at 10, some of them will be at minus 5. It's a bit random, but just put the Y to 0 to center it, and that just makes our lives a lot easier. And now what you're going to want to do is come up to the top here, where you'll see the option to show and hide the bones and background, so you can tick that on and off, if you want to get a better view of what you're doing. And then next to it you'll have the mesh view, the solid view, the material view, so you can see now the materials are showing, and then you also have the rendered view. And we're going to be working predominantly in the material view for the time being, and now what you're going to want to do is start posing. If you want to pose it with a gun or something like that, then you just do the exact same thing we did to import the character. You go up to File, Append, and then you go up. Instead of going into characters, you go into weapons instead, then into weapons.blend, then into collection, and you'll see all the options in here. So what I used was the Luger Silencer Wraith, I believe is the one that I added. Yeah, over here. This is the one that I used in my thumbnail. In order to drag it, just make sure you have the bones selected and not the actual gun itself, otherwise you'll start moving parts individually. So you're going to want to just make sure you have the bones selected, then you'll be able to move it all as one object. In order to move, obviously you use this up here, you can press G, or you have then the rotation to rotate things about different axes. You can do that just by using these two tools on the left. So that's how you're going to be positioning things. I'm just going to drag this across to my model and put it up somewhere like that, just to make it easier, and we can then position it in our hand later on. In order to position the model, you're not going to want to just grab the bones and start rotating them and things like that, like this. That's just going to move the whole body, which you don't want. In order to position her, make sure you select her bones, come up to where it says object mode and go into pose mode. And now what you'll see is there's all these bones of different colors, and you're going to want to try and find the ones in here which move different parts. So as you can see, the bone structure is quite complicated. I'm going to try and simplify this as best as I can when I release my pack, but for the time being this is fine. Once you're used to it, it's going to be pretty easy. But as you can see, you've got the different controls for her arms, different controls for her clothes, her facial expressions, hair, all things like that. In order to move them, like for example if I want to move this elbow, I'm just going to select this bone here, go to the rotation, and you can see if I rotate it, it now moves her arm, right? So let's say I want to rotate her head, I can do something like that. Move her hair around a little bit, something sort of like this. Lift her arm up. I found that the red bones are going to be the ones that you want to select most of the time. There are other ones, like some of these green ones will do like weird things like this, which, you know, you can use if you feel like it, but, you know, predominantly you're just going to want to be using the red ones. Except for when it comes to things like her neck, where you're going to want to use this white one, but, you know, it's just pretty much just trial and error. You'll find the ones that you want to use. So for me, I had her in some sort of position where her arm was up like this, the elbow was rotated like that, something like that, and I brought this up, and her hand was something like that, gripping the gun. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the modelling. It's pretty simple. You just move the bones around so you get them into a position that you want. There's really not that much to it. It just takes trial and error, and it's a little bit tedious. If you want to now move the gun into a hand or something like that, then you're going to need to come back out into object mode, select the bones over here, and drag it into her hand just like this, and rotate it, and pretty much just position it in there as best as you can. And then once it's in there, you're then going to select the bones of her again, go back into pose mode, and grab her fingers and rotate them and get them to wrap around the gun like you would in real life. Then when you're happy with your pose, you're going to come back out into object mode, deselect everything, press Shift A, come down to camera, and you'll see now there is a camera on the screen. If you press 0 on your numpad, that will take you into the camera view. And the best way I found to move the camera view around is to set up a keybind. So what I did, if you come up to edit and then preferences, go down to key map and search for navigation, you'll see view navigation, walk, fly. I put mine on Shift F, which was the default in Blender 2.7, so that's what I'm used to. So I'm just going to leave it like that. So, you know, make that whatever you want. So for me, it's Shift F. So if I press Shift F, you'll then see I get this crosshair. And if I move my mouse around, you can see I can look around. And if I can use WASD to move, it's pretty much just like flying around in spectator mode or something like that. So you're just going to come to a position that you're happy with, something like this. And then you can make any final adjustments to the model afterwards. So for example, if I want to select the bones, go back into pose mode and say I want her to look at the camera, I could do something like that, and then come in and change some face expressions, like, you know, move her eyebrows, make her smile, things like that. You know, you're just going to play around with it, and the camera view is basically going to be what the final render is going to look like. So if I go into my original file, you can see this is what it looks like. I've modeled her how I want her to be for my render. You can see she's got the gun in her hand, slightly twisted to the right, shooting out in this direction. She's looking slightly past the camera, and I've put a light source in this hand, so it's like she's holding an orb, which I'll add later on in Photoshop. So the next part's going to be lighting your character. So once you position them how you want, if you go into the rendered view at the top up here, you can see this is the rendered view. You can see in her hand, I've added this blue light, which you can see if I move around, just affects her like that. I just added it into her hand because I wanted to get some accurate reflections onto her body of what the orb would look like if it was in her hand, rather than trying to add them later on in Photoshop. So I just thought that was an easier way to do it. If you want to add lights, you just press Shift A, come down to light, choose whether you want a point, sunspot, whatever. I'm just going to go with a point, and you can see wherever I drag it to, it's going to cast a light onto her just like that. If you come over down here to the lighting options, if you have the light selected, you can change the power of it, so you can make it brighter, darker, things like that, as well as the color of it if you want to, you know, change the color. I don't bother with lights unless it's for things like the orb, for example, like, you know, little minor things, or maybe if I want to make the gun glow, if it's not already, I believe it has a glowing texture already, but I only use the lights typically for certain things. For normal environmental lighting, I don't bother creating an entire lighting setup every time. I use what's called an HDRI. For this thumbnail, I used a free one, which I'll leave a link to in the description, which is this one. It's called Delta 2. It's pretty much just this scene, and I downloaded the 2K version. So once you downloaded that and put it in your downloads folder, you'll see it's right here, delta2_2k.hdr. And what that's going to do is just add some natural environmental lighting to my character. In order to add it, you're going to come over to shading, change this from object to world. You'll see background node. You're just going to press delete on that, press Shift A and search. Click search and type in environmental texture. Take this, drag the color to surface, and then hit open. Find your HDR, so in my case that's Delta 2. I'm going to hit open image, and then if we switch to the rendered view, it's now got that background which we saw on the website. You see, this is now imported into our scene, and it's casting light on her like it would do in real life. If I go back to the normal layout, you'll see like this. You can see I'm in the rendered view, and it's not really looking too good. This is because we're using the Eevee render engine. So if you come over to the right and click on this little camera icon and change the render engine from Eevee to cycles, you'll see the lighting will suddenly get a lot more realistic, and in my opinion just looks a lot better. It will take longer to render this way, but the results are definitely much more worth it. As you can see, she's now got accurate shadows around her hair, under her arm, things like that. It's still kept that blue glow from the orb light that I added, so that's all preserved. It just looks a lot better than if I was to spend ages trying to drag all these lights around, and it's, you know, it's a lot faster to do as well. And then what you're going to want to do is remove this background texture, because you don't want that being rendered out with your image. You want to render it out with a transparent background so you can put a Valorant screenshot behind it. And in order to do that, you're just going to come down on the scene settings down to where it says film, and then you're going to tick transparent, and you'll see it will now disappear. And she's still got all the lighting affecting her, but you don't have that background. And now just before we render it out, you're going to come up to the scene settings again, and you'll see render you'll see viewport, which is 30. So what we're seeing right now is 30 samples, and then you can set the render to be however many you want. So I use 250. It's going to take a little while to render, like 2 or 3 minutes, but you know, that's fine. I'd rather have that. As you can see, there's lots of noise around, just all this graininess in her face, which, you know, doesn't look too good. So by bumping this up to 250, it gets rid of the majority of that. However, there is still a little bit left, but when it's a thumbnail, you're not going to tell, so it's perfectly fine. 250 is about the sweet spot, I'd say. So I chucked that at 250. And you're just going to pop down to this option, printer looking icon, change the resolution to 1920 by 1080 if you don't already have it set like that. And you're going to make sure you're on a PNG with the color RGBA, which is red, green, blue, and alpha. So alpha is what's going to give us that background alpha channel so that it's transparent, so we can drag it on top of whatever we want. And a color depth of 8, no need to go to 16, and compression of 0. And then to render it out, all you're going to do is press F12, and you'll see this window will open, and it will start to render out our image. And now, as you can see, the image is rendered out, so you're just going to come up to image, hit save as, and then choose where you want it to go. So mine's going to be in my downloads, and I'm going to call it tutorial and hit save as image. And then if I bring this up, you'll be able to see tutorial if I open that up. There you go, it's rendered out and it's looking pretty good. You see there's still a little bit of grain in her face and things like that, but it's really not that noticeable, especially once it's been shrunk down into a thumbnail. And now all we want to do is import this into Photoshop. So in order to do that, we're just going to load up Photoshop and drag and drop our image into it. So as you can see, it's now opened up in here. So the first thing you're going to need is a background. So for that, I released a Valorant screenshot pack with 200 full HD Valorant screenshots. So you just go down to the description of this video and you can see the download link here. So you can get that, and then all you're going to want to do is find it. So mine's here, and you're going to just pick out a screenshot from it. So for me, I used an Ascent one. I used Ascent 5 in my thumbnail. So if I drag and drop that in and tick and drag it behind the layer of that, you can see that's the background that I used in my thumbnail. And now you're going to want to make her stand out from the background a bit more. So in order to do that, you're going to want to blur the background. So you're going to come up to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and then I had mine, I guess, at 4.6. I don't know if I've done anything since then, but 4.6 looks pretty good. So I'm going to leave it like that. And then what I'm going to do is create a new layer above the background, and I'm going to press G and I'm going to fill it completely black. Get an eraser, drag it up. In order to change the size of it, you hold Control and right click, and then you can, if you drag sideways, it's going to make it bigger or smaller, and up and down is going to make it harder or softer. So make it a soft 0% hardness and make it pretty big so that it pretty much touches all the corners. And then you're just going to click to erase and do that 1 or 2 times. And as you can see, that's now added a little vignette effect onto the background like that. And then another thing that I do is add some lights above it, which I'll put above all the layers, so that's even above the character. So I'll create a new layer, press the B for brush, press X to swap white to the foreground, zoom out a little bit and drag the brush size up, and then I'll click up here and you see it's added a little light. It's just added a little bit of extra lighting coming from the sky up here, which you can see. Try and match this to where the sky is in your screenshot. I'm going to presume it's going to be at the top, just like mine is, so I put a light up there. And then I also add a color to the background to make it blend in slightly more. So I'll just click on the background layer, add a new layer above it, and select a color which is going to be like my dominant color in the photo. So for me, this is this like light blue color. So I'm just going to come over there and get something like that, and fill this with a light blue, and then change the blending mode to overlay, and drag the opacity down to a point that I'm happy with. So I think something like that is quite good. Now that you've got the background sorted, so that's the color, the actual background itself, the light, and the vignette. Now I want to change the color of the red in her gun to becoming blue. So I'm just going to go over to it, go to the layer with the model on it, create a new layer and then hold Alt and click in between those two. So that's going to create a clipping mask. So now this layer will only affect this one. I'm going to select the clips layer. I'm going to set it to hue as the blending mode for the clipping layer. And now if I start coloring over the red, you'll see it's now going to start changing to blue. So if I do this for all the different sections, try not to go too far over it. Like for example, if I start colouring over here, it's not too noticeable, but if I colour over here, you see the end starts turning blue. So you just want to try and keep it to where the red is. So I'm just going to zoom in and change my brush size accordingly and just change all of the red. You don't have to be too accurate, it's not going to be that noticeable, but in certain positions or in certain places it will be. So just try and be as accurate as you can whilst also not spending forever on it. I'm just going to colour in every section on here and make it all blue. And now as you can see, the gun is blue. There is some red reflections onto a hand, which you can go over if you want, but in my experience, when you come out, it looks a bit dumb. So I just leave it as it is, and when it's shrunk down into a thumbnail like this big, you're not going to notice it. In the top right, I have the little navigator window, so you can see what it's going to look like as a thumbnail, so I don't have to keep constantly zooming in and out. But yeah, that's about the size of a thumbnail, so by having that up there, I can constantly look at it and see that, oh, you see the red on her hand is not noticeable at all. So I'm just going to leave that as it is. And now next up is adding the orb. So I'm going to come over to her hand and I'm going to take this image of an orb which I found on Google. I'm just going to drag and drop it in, and as you can see it's here. And I'm just going to position it over her hand, something like that. Change the opacity down a bit so that I can sort of see where I'm placing it. I want it to be something like that. I want it to cover her thumb and then come into her hand, something sort of like that. And then if I tick it and drag the opacity back up, you can see it's now sort of looks like it's in her hand. I don't like the color of it, so I'm going to just change the color of it by clicking down here on the effects, change to color overlay, and then change this to either overlay or hue depending on what you think looks best. I'll go with hue for this one. And as you can see, it's now changed the color of the orb to the color which we had as our foreground color before, which is what we used for the gun and what was the color that the light was that was emitting onto her body earlier. So now the lighting over here actually makes sense. You see it's coming from this orb. Now to make the orb actually appear like it's in her hand, select the model layer, press Ctrl J to duplicate it, and I'm going to drag the bottom one up above the orb, and then I'm going to change the opacity down to the point where it looks like her hand is sort of coming through the orb, something like that, to make the orb look like it's almost half transparent. And then I'm just going to come in, go to the orb layer, and then I'm just going to add a layer mask by clicking this button down here on the actual orb itself, pressing B and drawing on it with black. So I'm going to make sure that this is black, and then wherever I paint is basically it's just going to get rid of what's there. So if I come down here and I start painting black onto where her fingers are, so like this, you can see it's now going to just remove the sections where her fingers are from the orb, so it looks more real. And if you ever go over a section which you want to undo, like up here for example, if I press B and then press X, it's going to swap the black and white to the foreground and background color. So if I paint on with white, it's going to hide, like get rid of what's there, and then if I paint on with black, it's going to show what's there. So I'm going to want to paint with white just to remove this edge part. And then as you can see, I've now painted it out, and her hand is actually, looks like she's holding the orb. I did a bit of a better job in my original because I had it come down to where her pinky was, but I sort of forgot about that at this point. So, you know, we're just going to leave it like that. And as you can see, I've also masked out her arm as well, except we need to blend it up here a little bit. So I'm just going to increase the size and the hardness to about 0. And just sort of try and feather that in a little bit so it looks something like that, which to me I think that looks pretty good. This corner bit needs to be fixed though, so I'm just gonna, and that should be pretty good. It now looks like it's sort of transparent because you've got her hand sort of coming through it like that, and you've also got her fingers going around it, so that looks pretty good. Now final thing I'd add is like a muzzle flash to the end of the gun. So what I did for that is I came over to here, went to the layer above where I changed the blue, and added another layer, and then I pressed L for my lasso, changed the color to a sort of orangey color, something like that, and then did a sort of pattern like this to where it looks like it's sort of shooting at the end of the gun like that, and then round the back like this, and then press G to fill that, and you can see that now looks sort of like a muzzle flash, and once we blur it, it'll look even better. And then to blur it, I come up to filter, blur, I did lens blur, and then pressed OK, and now you can see it sort of looks like a sort of muzzle flash. I may change the color of that slightly, so if I come to color overlay and then increase the color to like a sort of, let's see, maybe a slightly brighter orange, something like that. So that was before and after. I think something like that looks slightly better in my opinion. Of course, you know, do what you feel looks right. And then I came down to the layer just above again, pressed a new layer, clipped this one down, got a brush, made it nice and big, and then just, if I get that color back, and then just tapped on the end like that, and then if I lower the opacity of it like this, you can see it sort of just adds a little bit extra. I might make the muzzle flash slightly bigger as well. You go something like that, and that looks quite good. And then below it, I'll add another sort of glow, something, make the hardness really low, do something like that, and then drag this below the model so that it's on the background, and lower the opacity, something like that. Just adds a little bit more of a glow. So you can see now we've got the muzzle flash, which is this, we've got the glow on the gun, which is that, and then we've got a glow on the background, which is that, and it just makes it look like she's actually shooting a gun. Up close it looks a bit weird, but from a distance you see up here in the thumbnail it looks pretty realistic, so we're going to leave it like that. And then one final thing that I add is if I go right to the top and make sure the light that we added is right at the top above everything, and then I went down here and I chose curves, put that right at the top, and if I drag this down you can see we've got the curves here, and if I drag this down slightly and drag this up slightly, it just adds a bit more contrast. So it just adds a bit more contrast. So, and as you can see we've got before and after, and it just adds a little bit more contrast. And if you see the thumbnail on the top right, it just makes it a bit more eye grabbing. It's going to get people's attention more, and they're more likely to click on it if the colours are more vibrant. And now the only one thing that I'd say that's left to do, if you feel like it, you don't have to, but you know, sometimes I'll add it depending on how I'm feeling, is I'll select the one with the lowered opacity all the way down to the original render, press shift to select all of those, and then press Ctrl J to duplicate them all, and Ctrl E to merge them all into one, and then come up to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, blur it by about 3, and then add a mask, paint black down the middle of it, and that just sort of adds this sort of depth of field effect. So the gun muzzle's out of focus, and so's the orb. So you see before and after. And I just think it adds a little bit more, and I think this just adds a little bit more depth to the thumbnail itself. If you're getting stuff like here where it's got a double glow, because obviously we've duplicated the same thing on top of it, and you don't like it being that extreme, you can just come down to the bottom layer, add a mask on here, and if you do the exact same thing and just mask out that part, obviously be careful not to you know, hide the actual model itself. But if you just go around where the glow was, like up here for example, and you see you can get rid of certain parts, and you know, that'll fix your issue. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much how I make my thumbnails. If you guys enjoyed or found this helpful, make sure you leave a like on the video and subscribe for future content. Check out my montages and edits as well as my other tutorials if you're interested in learning anything else. And that's pretty much it. I'll catch you in the next video.